Hey guys, this is the Wild Nutrition Podcast, and I'm your host, Chris Heskett, and we are going to talk a little bit about the upcoming hunting season I'm getting excited for. So, obviously, if you don't know, I shouldn't say obviously, but if you don't know, I'm also part of another podcast, and I think this is where this podcast is going to start to split off and go more towards the outdoors and hunting content. I kind of want to get rid of the nutrition part of this because Stop Talking About Fat Loss is where I co-hosted with Aaron McDonald with 8 Wellness Collective, and that is where we talk more like nutrition, fitness, and other stuff. So if you haven't gone and followed that one, you don't know about that one, make sure you go and follow me over there. Two easy ways to do it depending on where you're listening from. You can either go from just searching it up, which we're now on YouTube as well over there. So YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, etc., Audible. Or if you're listening on Spotify right now, I have it for the more like this. So if you scroll all the way up and you see like the picture and all the episodes, and there's an option there, it's like the about section, and then there's like more like this. You should be able to just click that and go over and give that a follow. So we've released an episode every single Wednesday over there. So with that being said, I have hunting season coming up. I know many of you who listen hunt, not all of you do, but we have some important lessons because it was a challenging setup. Things did not go according to plan. I think that's the theme of this year. Is there's a lot of things, both in my professional and personal life, that did not go according to plan this year. It's been a little bit of a shit show. Obviously, there's things that are just pivot and adapted, but my garden has been an absolute shit show. So before we talk about hunting, garden last year was fucking amazing, and this year we had so many issues. We had to replant basically everything from the beginning. Things got sun scorched. We had flea beetles that wipe things out, in addition to all the other pests that can come in, and we just had things get wiped out. We had a really hot in Southeast PA here, very hot, dry spring, so things just got burnt up too. The seedlings just couldn't handle it, so we just had so many struggles early on that set everything back, and then things just didn't go according to plan because so many plants got stunted early on that they took too long to recover. And what my original thought process was didn't work out with my peppers because they just got shaded out by the tomato plants. They were kind of like planted in between. That was my goal this year. But I was like, get the peppers up moving fast. Well, they got all really stunted early on. And so they didn't really do anything for a while. And then the tomatoes got a little too big. We had a bunch of tomatoes that just did not go well. So zucchinis, pumpkins, cucumbers, another year without cucumbers because they got wiped out with pests. Zucchinis got decimated by vine borers. So we had a bunch of zucchinis, and then next thing you know, nothing. And then I replanted, and that plant got stunted right away. I don't know, there's disease in the soil or something. So what we're doing is making a plan for next year. Like, I'm taking notes. We're writing this down so then next year we can pivot and turn around and plan in a way that is better. So we've already talked about we're going to remove the A-frame. We're getting some cattle panels next year. That's where we're going to do the cucumbers and a few other things. Pumpkins got decimated by vine borers. So we're going to just have to spray way more. A whole bunch of stuff, just disease started kicking because they got hurt by vine borers but survived, but then they were weak. So we had disease set in. So that wiped out our acorn squash. We have butternut that's really struggling. And they were not producing any female flowers. So right now, this is September 16th. I'm literally recording this and I'm posting it. So right now they're starting to produce more female flowers to produce more pumpkins. And I'm just like, well, shit, I don't know if we'll have enough time to get. Now we have up until mid-October. And honestly, past couple years, I think last year we didn't get a hard frost that killed off everything until basically Halloween, and the year prior was the same thing. So we have about a month for the pumpkins to ripen, which is a really short time frame. So I don't know. We have a handful that are like there, but last year we had over 300 pounds of pumpkin from my fairly small pumpkin patch. And we had a lot of mess ups there too. Things we thought I was hoping to not spray this year. We planted all these wildflowers that are supposed to be perennials. Well, the weeds just overtook. They really didn't come up. And I didn't spray because I didn't want to destroy our wildflowers. Well, so now the pumpkins are competing with weeds, which are invasives. That's what's really competing there. It's like Japanese hops, which is a vine that is super invasive in this area, and it kind of strangles them. So there's just a bunch of things this year that's like shit, fuck, shit, ugh. So still going to get some, but not as much as we wanted. Tomatoes are producing really well, but that's all that's coming out of the garden. The okra really didn't take off. Like we're getting like a piece here or there, but it didn't like explode. We're getting some tomatillos, small ones, but tomatillos, and then ground cherries were successful. Peppers were semi-successful with certain varieties, and certain varieties just died. And so next year, for example, what we're going to do next year is on the outside of the garden, we're putting the cherry tomatoes because I kind of let them do their thing. And what they can do is kind of grow up and then grow over the edge and down the other side. And I'm fine with that. So then they're not shading out other things. And they kind of shade out some of the beefsteak tomatoes, which they don't get as crazy growth. So now the beefsteaks are taking off. I'm like, it's mid-September. Like I was hoping for like August to be eating these, but no, now we're getting like mid-September. Like we got a few off of them and then they just got stunted. And again, I'm fertilizing on a regular basis. I got a little bit slack because things came up, but now I'm back to fertilizing on a regular basis. Things are taking off. So, and that's just a situation with the garden of like things not going according to plan. So what we're going to do instead, like I said, cherry tomatoes on the outside, and then on the inside of the garden, because we have just rows in the ground. For the tomato section, then we're going to do the beefsteak and paste tomatoes there. And then in between all of that, that's where we're going to do a row of peppers. We're not going to plant in between. We're not going to try to interplant. We're just row of peppers right down the middle. And if we interplant anything, it's going to be herbs and it's going to be flowers like marigolds and things like that. That's what we'll interplant. So it's just learning to pivot and figure out and taking, the shit and understanding, okay, what we needed to do is plant everything and then come in with like neem oil and other things. And that would have helped with controlling the vine borers, controlling the powdery mildew and other things like that. So it's like learning, yes, it sucks for this year, but we had so many pumpkins last year that honestly, we are going to be fine because we have still a ton of frozen pumpkin in the freezer. So like for cooking like our own pumpkins, we're fine. We can do everything that uses like pureed pumpkin. We can't because we just roasted and stuck into freezer bags. We're not going to be able to do chunks, but we'll probably have enough pumpkin for that stuff. Pumpkin, winter squash, etc. So there's still a handful. Trombettas were a huge success. Another year without carving pumpkins again growing. So we'll be paying for those out of pocket because I love carving pumpkins for Halloween. So that's the garden. And then going into hunting season of things not going according to plan. I've had some issues with my bow. I think my tuning's a little off. And the arrows might not be exactly how they should be. So I've brought the distance in from shooting 50 yards, and that's where I like to shoot for the spot I hunt in Gettysburg, my parents' property. I like to be able to shoot out to 50 yards because that's a common range that the deer come into and they won't get any closer. Just the way we are. So not going to be able to do that. So it's 40 yards, which honestly is more comfortable because I'm shooting a 3-pin sight. So I have a 20, 30, 40. So I don't have to change anything, but there's just some things that have been a little bit off. The more I learn about bows, the more I just need to go to the bow shop and get things done. But it really wasn't in the budget for this year. So that's kind of going into next year. Still accurate to 40 yards. Like it's it's fine. So unfortunately, I did not get to shoot with broadheads on this weekend. So this upcoming weekend is going to be when we do broadhead tuning and see if there's any final adjustments. But I think my rest is a little bit off. I think that's the issue of I need to align that a little bit more, but I'm not 100% sure. So that's kind of the situation that is going on with my bow. But in terms of things not going according to plan, so this weekend we want to get out beginning of September to go and set up a stand. We have this really crappy stand. It's a single person stand. It's not super tall. Actually, it was left by someone who was my parents had as a tenant on the property, but and all of a sudden the stand was just left there, and it's a really shitty, crappy stand. And we're like, who is it? Well, it was on there for like 2 years, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take it. I'm going to replace some of the stuff in it, do some maintenance, and honestly, the largest buck I've ever shot, I shot out of that crappy little stand. It works. It works just fine. So we were supposed to go out beginning of September, and my mom actually ended up going out for some reason, and she sent us a message of like, you can't. And there is a major issue. I'm not going to go into details of what it was, but there was some things that went wrong with the property, and it was not going to be safe to go. It wasn't trespassers or anything like that. But it was like, don't come out with the girls. So it's not going to be safe for them to be out. You're going to have to go get like a hotel, and that's going to be just a giant shit show. Like, so if you're not a hunter, obviously you kind of don't want to be doing things on the property right before hunting season. You kind of want to wait, like do that. Beginning of September is like you're kind of like the last chance, and it's like she's like, well, come out mid-September, because they were coming down because there's a new business renting out the old store there. So that they're renting. It's going to be cool. It's a World War II antique business. So it was come out then. We'll be able to help out with the girls. So, okay, we're going to get that stand set up. We're going to check on our other stands, because that's the other thing. June got away from us. July got away from us. August got, we're like, we need to get out there. We need to get out there, because we leave the stands up year round, which technically you're not supposed to do, but we don't have the place to take them down. Like, we don't have the time, and we can't, like, it's just not feasible with our girls right now to take all that down each year. So instead, what we do is we go out, inspect, make sure nothing's rusted out, make sure all the straps are safe. We buy really high quality straps that can withstand the weather. So we go out and we make sure all of that is set up and is safe for the season. And if it's not, we go out and replace. So next year we're going to replace the straps. It doesn't matter. We're just replacing the straps. So it's a couple years they're good, and then we'll use them maybe for some other small things. Like we might not necessarily throw them out unless they're really rusted and it's starting to dry rot, but we go look at them, test them, everything's fine, great. But we also had to go and clear paths to them, because everything, like, there's so many wild raspberries and other types of shrubs and things that grow. So we had to go out. We had to cut the paths into the area. And this weekend, everything got rushed. Super, super insane. So we got out Friday, and it was probably the worst drive I've ever had going out there. Other than like coming back super disappointed, but going out, it was one of the worst drives. The traffic was fucking awful. Just people really, I had someone, I'm like, they're either drunk or they're trying to collect insurance money, because they're like slamming on the brakes, driving 10 miles an hour under the speed limit, swerving. And this is and then they will only go the speed limit or speed up above the speed limit at the passing zones. So there's only a few of those. And so everything seemed, I'm like, what the fuck is this person doing? Very, very weird. And then the traffic was just stop and go, and people driving super slow. I'm like, what the fuck? This is a Friday. Like we left around 2:30. So it's like by the time we were in these different areas, it was like 3 o'clock, 3:34, like not rush hour, not rush hour. It was a absolute shit show. I couldn't imagine what rush hour was going to be that day. It was fucking terrible. So that's how it started. And so the next day, my wife went off with her best friend to Hershey Park. They've been planning a girls' getaway day for a while, which is totally fine. And that was that Saturday. It was been planned for months. So it's like, oh well, I'm still going. It's actually closer to out there. So I was like, that's fine. Go do that. Well, I thought the person coming to kind of inspect the building and everything was going to meet with my parents on Saturday. So then Sunday we would have my parents to watch the girls, so we could go out. No, that person's actually coming Sunday. I'm like, fuck. So they're trying to like do some repairs last minute in the store. I have the girls, and the thing with the wood line where we hunt, everything is pokey, scratchy. There's ticks. It's out there. There's ticks. There's snakes. There's mosquito. Like you can't take two girls under the age of 2 and have them like in a cart unsupervised up there. That's basically what I'm getting at. So you can we take them back supervised and walk, but like for me to go and like clear stuff, like it's just not realistic. So it ended up being like I'm watching them most of the day. I was able to put like the tree stand together. I was able to do a few things, but nothing major. It was just like, oh shit, how are we going to do this the next day? Because the dude's coming at noon and we need to leave by like 2:30. He's probably going to be there for an hour and a half. Like we're going to have to cram everything into the morning. So we ended up getting the stand put up. So my mom was able to watch them. They finished up on Saturday. And this was where things would pivot. We also needed to scout out and find places to put game cameras. I know I'm kind of jumping around the story here, but I'm literally winging this episode. So the other thing is last year we had a ton of buck damage to the entire property, but my parents have been planting trees and trying to improve the property, make it look prettier, et cetera, and grow certain trees. And so last year, the bucks just decimated a lot of the newer trees that they planted, and some of them were lost. So some of them came back. Most of them actually came back, but some of them did die or are severely stunted this year. So we're like, okay, we need to figure out where we're going to put these game cameras. So if there's we start to see a lot of damage, we can start to identify which bucks are problems. So the problem is the cameras my dad had, because I have a camera out there, but I don't have a ton of cameras, and I have the other cameras set up here where I live. So he's like, well, I have 4 cameras. 3 of them don't seem to be working. I got two of those 3 to work, and one of them just has corrosion. So I think it's just a replacement battery tray. But we had to spend time figuring out where we can put these, where we think, because there's not sign yet. I have the historical sign, but we're not seeing sign of like where the bucks are traveling yet. I mean, it's still early. That's not going to be more to like October timeframe until we see that. So probably have to go back out and move them. But taking into consideration historically last year where we saw the damage, I placed a couple cameras. So I had to figure out where we're going to put that based off where the trails are, based off last year's information, and what's going to be realistic to capture the most. Because it was also like, I don't get to spend that much time out there scouting, especially this year. So like trying to figure out what's the path that they're doing, because we did change some of their movement patterns since my parents had these 3 apple trees. Well, they got way too big, so they pruned them. Well, and between the pruning, the massive pruning, and then the drought we had this year, the apple trees produced 0 apples this year. Usually this time of year, the ground is inundated with apples. So deer are obviously coming and eating the apples. Nope, not this year. So that I'm like, well, that's going to change it a little bit, and might be why this area isn't there. There's not as many deer as usual. So spend time doing that. Ended up finding where we want to put the stand. Got the stand put up the next day. So my parents watched the girls. I cut a path in, and my wife and I set the stand up, which is a giant pain in the ass to get the seat, the hang on seat to go on. But we got that set up. It's just a pain in the ass because I'm like kind of hanging off, and you need two hands to put the seat up, but you also need one hand on the stand so you don't fall off. So it ends up being that I kind of just use my head to hold the seat up and then get the straps tight enough. And then once they're semi tight enough, I then crank the straps super tight. And then we use two straps for that seat. So it's like double secured. So we got that set up. And that's in to hunt a bedding area for mornings, which I'm super excited for. It's also a good place for like bad wind, but what I've found in the past is early mornings can be tough to get into position because of the deer bed down all across the property. So inevitably, we're always spooking some deer here or there. And so this spot can be a great early morning place to go until daybreak. And then at daybreak, we can sneak down to the other stands. That's the goal, at least. I don't know how that's going to pan out, but it's also a great place when the wind is really terrible that we can hunt mornings. I don't think it's going to be a great evening spot, but I did put a camera in there because the way the bucks travel is kind of through that area down to closer to my parents' property and then around the pond they have by the house, which is also where the apple trees were. So I set cameras kind of going along this trail, which we saw all the damage. And then we're going to be able to identify. So I think it will be only morning, but it could be a morning and midday or evening spot. And it'll be a good spot when my wife and I are both out there to hunt. Went down and had to clean up some of the other stands. We had to rush to set up some other stands. Meanwhile, I drank way too much coffee because I had alcohol the night before. I was really tired, and the girls kept us up. So I'm like heart rate way too high. I'm like slightly dehydrated. We're in the heat. It's not super hot, but it's hot enough that I'm sweating, and too much caffeine. And my heart rate's super high. So I'm like kind of doing things slow and taking breaks because I'm like, it shouldn't be this high. It's pumping a little too hard for me to be comfortable with, but I know it's because I had a little too much caffeine. So the one stand we looked at, we wanted to, ideally, I wanted to move it this year. We just didn't have the time for it. So we're going to have to pivot and hunt from it. It's going to be a decent rifle stand, but it's not a really good archery stand because the problem with it is not that you don't see deer. It's that all the deer just stay out range. They're like 60 yards, 70, 80 yards away from this stand based off location. So it's not a terrible location. It just needs to move just a little bit. But we also want to see, so last year in January, so where the WMU that this property is located in, now this year they've extended firearms into January. And last year, when I went out in January, there were deer at 100, maybe 80, between 80 and 100 yards. Not too far out, but and it's antlerless only. So a whole bunch of doe were right in front of me. Unfortunately, they end up getting wind of me and moving on because the pond near that location, the thermals changed the direction of and blew my scent right to them. But I was like, oh man, if I had a rifle, this would have been easy shot. There were like 6 of them just like standing out in the open. And then I didn't see them after they jumped into the woods and moved away from me. But they were there. So I'm like, well, maybe we just need to put another stand in. Like we get another stand and just put it over rather than moving to the stand. We just get another one. So that's a possibility we'll see this year. So that's where I'm like, well, if we move, so the problem is if we move, the way the setup is, it's woods on both sides and then it's an ag field in between. So the deer obviously come out to the ag field. This year it's soybeans, but whether it's corn or soybeans, they're coming out into that ag field. But it's also a travel corridor, so there's a pond right there, and there's not too much water elsewhere around. So it's where water is, and then in the back of the property between this, because power lines go down the middle, there's it's just like a wildflower meadow. So it's like a bedding area. They can bed down and be hidden in that because that stuff gets 5, 6, 7 feet high. And so they'll bed down and hide. And that's actually one of the stands. We actually hunt that area because the bucks travel through that while they're rutting like crazy. So they're just going in and out, in and out. And so the problem with moving the stand is if we move it over, make a better archery stand, we now don't have a great rifle stand because where that one, ideally, you're going to be shooting, you no longer have a visual that long. You could just be in a different stand if you want, you would have the same. So the other rifle stand for that property, you would just move to that stand. You wouldn't get any benefit other than maybe a wind change. So that's where I'm like, maybe we just leave that one. It's not the greatest stand. We can put a better archery stand over here, or we do move that one, put a different stand there, and then over in this other location, we put the new stand. But this year, we kind of figure out kind of where the deer are coming from using the cell cam. We have a rough idea. That's also where there's a lot of acorns. So I'm thinking it's going to be a better place to hunt is kind of over by some of these rocks that are on the property. The rifle stand just needed to be cleared out. That was fine. There were a whole bunch of vines growing up it, and it just needed general maintenance. The one weed tree by it, of course, grew up and had to trim that down so you actually can like have a shot at something. And then the other thing we want to do was rotate the one archery stand over the meadow area. The problem is when we got down there, we would have to trim away and do so much that I don't think it's worth it. So I think what we'll end up doing, and the reason we want to rotate it is based off the location. It's hard to shoot anything that comes from our right side. So you have to be standing. And a lot of times I like to sit because I'm more still when I sit. It's just going to be a standing one for that location because that's just the way that location is going to be. It's kind of out in the open, so that's why I'm like, I also don't like stand because you're more likely to move around, but the deer can kind of come from any direction, so you kind of have to stand. So I like to kind of like get there. It's like just before daylight, you want to get into that stand. And then you can hunt bedding. A lot of times, like last year I snuck in and I had deer come right up to me. Like they were just bedded down. They didn't move from their bedding area because I was able to sneak in. So the neighbor who helps out and hunts that, he actually cleared out an area. So it should be nice to be there. But I'm thinking we might actually need to move it. So that's what I'm going to be looking at this year is potentially moving that to be, hide us a little bit more, give us some more cover. But I don't know if moving it's necessarily going to be the right move. It's going to be based off movement this year. That's going to be the thing to learn with that stand is last year we saw the buck movement and they kind of came across the field at a diagonal. But if we can call them in, then it doesn't matter so much. They will actually give us time to get ready if they're coming at a diagonal and we can do a quick call and already kind of be in position as they come over. So lots of things. We didn't have a ton of time to by the time we got down to that stand, we had 8 minutes to look at that stand, clean it up before we had to walk back to get back to my parents who were watching the girls for them to make their meeting with time to spare, not be rushed. So it was we didn't have time to super analyze things or adjust. So it was just a lot of overthinking planning, but in a very short amount of time, things were very crammed and it's going to be this is how things are going to go. We might There might be some hunting from off the ground this year. I kind of know some places that you can kind of stay still and hunker down and hide if the deer are coming there. That might be the solution to do, based off the wind, or my wife to do if she can do that. That might be the solution. I'm not sure, but I think that could be a cool. There's a potential there. That's what I'm saying. There's a potential to do that. Eventually, I would love to get out there for muzzleloader, but that's just keeps getting pushed off every year. I just want to get in line, and just the funds. I know next year the funds are going to go to maintenance on the bow or a new bow. So it's like, well, unless we win the lottery, I don't know. Anyways, with that being said, that's kind of how the weekend just things didn't go according to plan. But it's taking what, life doesn't always go according to plan. So it's going to be, okay, here's the current situation, and here's how to make the best of that situation. We already kind of know, or looking at the things we do know and can control, like we know where the deer come out. It just might be that we can't hunt from that stand. It's not going to work out for archery. We might need to hunt from the ground at a tree. We did set up another stand, and hopefully that game camera, the batteries don't die, and we get some really good images off of that, and can kind of see what's going on. So we'll see. There's a lot of unknowns going into this year. There's a lot of potential. We do already know that there's a lot of monster bucks out there, which my dad does not want on the property because they can damage a ton, and the young ones too. But he wants us to get rid of a few bucks. We can get rid of 2, and so things look good. It just didn't go according to plans. Pivoting, adjusting your plan, figure out what you could do instead, and moving on from that. We kind of know some movement patterns. So what we used to hunt, we might not hunt. So for example, that stand that's on the corner that I'm saying is not a great archery stand, but it's a good rifle stand. The rifle stand, what we're seeing is the bucks are coming out just out of reach of that corner stand and doing a beeline straight across to the rifle stand, which means the rifle stand might also be an archery stand. And depending on the winds, that's good. And that's something we've observed is sitting in the stand over the meadow is the rifle stand's right by that one. It is maybe 80 yards away through some really thick brush. Well, the rifle stand, the does and the buck will chase doe in there, and they'll stay in there for a long time. Well, we didn't hunt that because a lot of times the deer just stay way out of range. Well, now it might be, okay, we're going to both be over there. Our wind's going to kind of all be in one area. So instead of 2 people being across the property and spreading wind that way, spreading our scent, maybe we just stay in this one spot. And especially if the wind's kind of blowing out into not the best wind, that might be a really good potential spot to just sit and be and have them come in maybe behind us and give either myself or my wife a shot at something. Anyways, that's going to be it for today, guys. So if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to me. If you like the episode, make sure you subscribe, like, follow, whatever is appropriate for the channel you're listening to. Also, make sure you check me out over at the Stop Talk About Fat Loss podcast. If you want more dedicated health and fitness information, that one is dedicated just to health and fitness information. So make sure you follow that one with myself and co-host Aaron McDonald. And then if you are a hunter or anyone who is like more professional in the outdoor industry, you want to come on this podcast as a guest, let me know. Or if you know anyone who wants to do podcasts in the outdoor industry, let me know. I'm going to move this podcast in the direction of more outdoor stuff, whereas the other podcast is going to be dedicated to health, fitness, etc. Instead, this one being both things, is we're going to kind of start branching off here.